And it's no different here. If anything, we're probably in the heart of, apart from Kruger, of where the poaching is very high. It's a big issue. Leonfalosi are losing rhino, especially the state parks, and the private parks are losing a lot less as a result of the dehorning, but the threat is very, very real for us. So we lost our first rhino in 2014. That year we lost 8 rhino in the last 6 months of the year. 2015 we lost another 6 rhino, and then 2016 we lost another 2. So obviously prior to that, we, in anticipation of the fact that the situation was getting worse and worse, before we even lost the rhino, we put a lot of measures in place to try and stay ahead of the game and keep our rhino safe. We invested quite a lot of money in guard towers, which acts as a force multiplier. You'll see some of them as we drive around across the reserve. We also invested a lot of money in upgrading our radio communication system to help us, coordinate our reactions and responses to incursions much better. It's also a more secure system so that no one can listen in on our communications. And we put more money in feet on the ground, so getting a better reaction unit, more specialized units that can react in the event of an incursion. But we still lost rhino. And in 2016, when we lost our sort of 2 rhino early in the year, the board sat down and made a decision to dehorn our rhino. It wasn't an easy one to make because you sort of feel like you've failed, and now you have to go to the extent you have to deface these animals to keep them alive. But regionally, everyone moved into the direction of dehorning rhinos. So you can just imagine if we decided not to, how much more of a target we would have been. Like all of those syndicates would have moved from those parks. Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's all about risk and reward. If the reward is great and the risk of getting apprehended is not that high, then you will lose rhino. So the idea is to obviously ensure that there's very little reward for them and a very high risk of getting apprehended in the park. And that's the game we play, and we try and keep the odds in our favour in that way. We did lose a rhino after we started dehorning in November last year, black rhino, with very, very little regrowth. He was near one of our, his territory was near one of our northern fence lines. So it means that dehorning is not the solution, doesn't solve the rhino poaching crisis, and it definitely doesn't stop us from losing rhino, but it definitely puts the odds in our favour. Before we dehorned, we were having incursions maybe 3 or 4 times a week, which was very intensive. You can just imagine our anti-poaching unit would have to react, respond, then track. So it led to almost battle fatigue, constantly either on watch or on tracks, trying to apprehend suspects, then doing the follow-up to make sure that wherever those guys went, tracking that there was potentially a rhino that was wounded. Whereas now, if we have an incursion once every 2 months, it's a lot. So it's definitely changed the game for us in terms of being able to, or having a lot fewer incursions, and then our anti-poaching unit is obviously a lot more focused. They're well rested, but they also have enough time to focus on the high risk areas and hopefully make sure that we can apprehend suspects that do try and come into the park. So that's sort of the background as to why we're doing what we're doing now. The reason why you guys are here is because it's costly. We didn't budget and plan to put money aside for dehorning. It's a helicopter, veterinary bills. The drugs are very expensive to dehorn these animals, and it's an ongoing process. We have to dehorn our animals every 18 to 24 months. So it's just become part of our lives. I don't know what we did before with the time that we now spend on dehorning rhino, but yeah, exactly. Somehow had made time to fit this in our schedule as well, and it's an ongoing thing. It's just part of our lives. Every week, every Saturday, we end up dehorning rhino as we sort of try and go through the herd. We do have a healthy population of rhino, and therefore it's sort and and having guest participation obviously helps us to cover some of the costs. We don't make money off it. If anything, we're still having to put money aside for the dehorning, but it does make a big difference. It helps us to sort of keep the boat afloat and keep on top of keeping that regrowth down to the minimum. But the more important part for me about having people here is awareness. You know, I think everyone's become so desensitized to the rhino poaching problem. You know, oh, we just lost another one. Oh, we've heard about that. Yes, we know that, you know, it's just an ongoing thing and almost becomes acceptable until we get guests here present, actively participating and seeing firsthand to what extent we have to go to keep these animals alive. And I think it awakens a sense of emotionally, I think it's hard for people to see an urgency in saying that actually it's not acceptable. We cannot just accept that we're going to, you know, our rhino populations are being decimated, and that's the most important part for me. You know, after most of the dehornings, we get a lot of correspondence from the guests saying, well, how can we help, what can we do, etc. And that's I think what's the most important part for me. And you know, if we keep doing rhino and keep getting groups, where you can imagine we go through quite a substantial number of guests over a period of time where and everyone, you know, becomes more aware of how serious the issue is. I'll introduce you to the ground crew. They're hiding behind there. Guys, just look this way quickly. So Orton is the pilot. He's going to be doing the flying for us today. Mark is a veterinarian. He's going to do the dart. He'll do a quick briefing on the sort of veterinary side of things for you guys. Guinea, the big hairy guy, is ground crew. So he's got a radio. He'll have comms with a helicopter, and he'll make sure that you guys get close to the rhino and make sure that you're there on time for once the rhino's gone down, so that you don't miss out on any other action. Megan's going to be our scribe, make sure that all the data is being recorded and that we have all the information we need. We've got a couple of guys out in field at the moment looking for rhino. We've got one of the rhino monitors with the animal already that we're needing to do. But we are a little bit short of strong hands, so we're going to get Chris and some of the bigger guys to give us a hand. If the rhino's fallen badly and we need to move him into a position where he's comfortable, if they fall with their heads lower than their backsides, it means that their abdomen, and they've got very big abdomen, push onto their lungs. It sort of inhibits their breathing, and it can be very dangerous for the rhino. Obviously, the breathing is compromised to a certain extent from the drugs, so we have to work quickly. What you guys will do is, once we close, I'll wave you off when you can get off the vehicle. Don't get off beforehand. Reason being is if the rhino hasn't gone down properly, sometimes they're a little bit more resilient, so they'll stand and sort of be stumbling around. We'll put a rope on the rhino and trip him to just get him to go down. It does look painful, but it's not. These are big, strong beasts and they can deal with it. Just once the rhino's gone down, we'll blindfold them, and then you guys can get close. You really don't want to be trodden on by a big rhino bull. We collect tissue samples. That's part of the national database. So RODIS is the rhino genetics database that's being kept at Onderstepoort in Pretoria. So by law, we have to collect those samples every time we dart a rhino. And that's a very important part of what we do today. Reason being is that we collect blood, tissue, horn, and hair samples. It gets sealed into a bag, it gets taken to Onderstepoort, and they profile the DNA of that rhino. So they've got a database with a DNA profile on every rhino in the country so far. Well, not all of them, but those at least who have been immobilized. Which then allows us to, should they, pick up a horn at our Tambo International or on any of the border posts, they are able to link that horn to a crime scene, so a rhino that was poached illegally, and a legally obtained horn, which helps the prosecutions. Whereas before, they'd confiscate the horn at the airport or at any of the border posts, and they'd be, well, we don't know where it comes from, we don't know, whether it was illegally obtained or anything like that. So that's obviously a key component. We're going to get you guys to get involved and help us to collect those samples. We also take some measurements of the horn. It helps us to keep track of the regrowth, because that's just for our record, so we can see, especially the younger animals we find have got far faster regrowth than the adult animals. We'll do some photographs after the rhino's been dehorned. and you're welcome to use those. Just make sure that your location settings on your phones and cameras and everything switched off. Yeah. So we don't want any geotagged photographs. That information you can't see, but it is available to some of the bad guys out there that want to obtain that information. So we'll do some photographs. You're welcome to use it and try and enjoy the experience. It's a unique experience to be able to be that close to a wild rhino. They're amazing animals. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask myself or Mark when we're busy with the process. It is quite, we work as fast as we can. We want to limit the amount of time the rhino is down. If Mark feels that the rhino is compromised in any way, they sometimes don't react very well to the drugs, etc., we will wake the rhino up and we'll walk away, and we won't do a single thing because the animal welfare comes first. And then, I think you're just trying to enjoy the experience. Like I say, we'll work fast, and you have to sort of give us a little bit of space when Mark does the actual dehorning, and it is quite hard to watch. I think we've sort of gotten used to it by now, but I think for people that haven't seen that, it looked brutal, especially taking a chainsaw to a rhino's horn. But at the end of the day, just realize that animal is a little bit safer, and it's not painful. It doesn't harm the animal in any way. I'm going to ask Mark to give us a little bit of a background on the drugs we use, etc. And then I think we'll get going. And Fundisa's got a clean sea white rhino, so we're going to probably notch this animal. The animal we have now is about 2.5 to 3 years, and it hasn't been notched. So we also notch their ears in a specific pattern to make them identifiable in field. They don't have transmitters or collars. So what happens is that the monitors just pick up their binoculars, they can look at the specific pattern, it's got a number, oh, this is 103, and they record that animal's identity. And at the end of the day, we try and see all of our rhino within a specific period of time, because if we haven't, then we know that there might potentially be a rhino lying in a ditch somewhere. We need to make an effort to go and find them. So obviously, the monitoring component is important, so we try and stay on top of the notching as well. Thank you.
Morning, guys.
Morning.
I'm sure you've heard all of this before, but I don't know if everybody else has. So,
no, please.
I'm going to go through it again anyway, because there's some safety aspects obviously as well, but there's a lot of interesting aspects too, I think, to this whole story of darting rhinos. We started translocating rhinos back in the early 60s. And in those days, the only way we used to be able to catch them was off the front end of a Land Rover with a seat on the front and a long stick and a rope. And they used to chase these rhinos down until they put a noose over them, and then pull them down until they were so exhausted that you could actually bundle them up and put them in a crate. However, they used to lose 60 to 70% of those rhino. And that wasn't a hell of a successful way of catching rhino. And the reason they used to lose them is from a problem known as capture myopathy. We understand it better these days than they did in those. And capture myopathy basically is a massive stress-related issue. It's massive muscle contractions with lots of adrenaline, lots of stress hormone, lack of oxygen, high heat, and what happens is that you end up with breakdown of the muscles themselves. And as a result, you end up clogging up kidneys and livers, and they ended up with either muscle failure directly or a little later on kidney failure. So it wasn't a hell of a successful way of catching rhino. So then we looked at what we could use from a chemical point of view to help obviously immobilize rhino and to be able to do what we're doing today. And we looked at various groups of drugs and discarded many of them, and one of the biggest, there's a couple of things that we looked for in particular. It had to fit in a dart. Okay, they used to use much bigger darts than these back in the early 70s when they started with chemicals, but we've refined it right down to this, which is a 2cc dart. 2 cc's less than half a teaspoon. Okay, so it's not a hell of a lot of drugs. Back in the early days, they were around about 5cc darts, and there's a significant impact when a dart hits an animal, and the bigger the dart, the bigger the impact. It's all about inertia and energy transfer. Causes massive tissue damage the heavier and faster a dart flies. So the slower and the lighter and the smaller the dart, the safer it is. So we had to choose drugs that would fit in small darts. Normal human anesthetics, you'll see if you've ever had an op, the syringe is anything from 20 to 50 mils, and they will slowly inject it and you go to sleep. Now 20 to 50 mils flying through the air at the speed that darts fly will cause massive damage. Okay, so we